Welcome to Sean Cameron Photographic, and thank you so much for joining me once again. Do you know, I like this intimate camera angle, and I know a number of you have said you do too, so I thought I'd use it for this video. Why not? Now, I know I also said in my last video but one that I wouldn't use the Z6ii for my pro work. Well, an opportunity arose, then another, and I couldn't resist. Firstly, I was invited to do photography at something called a man trailing training day. Now, before you make up your own definitions, it's a sport whereby a person hides in a field somewhere and the dogs have to track them. Now, I knew by its very nature that I'd have plenty of time to use two cameras, and therefore no customers would be shortchanged if the Z6ii failed to deliver in any way. Do you know, it didn't, and I ended up using it more than the D850. Let's have a quick look at the session. I'm not going to show you every image that I took because it took all day. You get very bored very quickly, and I'll tell you about that later. Now, here's the scenario. I'm waiting with the hunted person, waiting for each dog and handler to appear over the horizon. So let's have a look. Oh, before we do, I'll tell you, to begin with, I used the wide area AF animal version and it worked very well. Now, the only problem is telling the camera where and when to focus. If you remember rightly, I had very good success with the birds in the sky using that particular focus mode, and that's where I started from. I sussed it out in the end and then I changed. So let's have a quick look at it. When the dogs were reasonably close, it worked really well, but with a shot like this, there's an awful lot for the camera to choose from inside that box, especially the shrubbery in front of the dog. I could raise the camera, of course, but the dog appears really quickly over the ridge, just like this one. This was, as I've said, taken with the wide area autofocus. The 300mm lens has really made the dog launch out of the background, even though it was only at f6.3. Yes, I know it would look better without the long line or large lead, but it's supposed to be there. It's man trailing, not dog running freely in field. Why 6.3 and not 2.8? Well, if the camera focuses on the nearest subject inside the box, as I suspect it does, then the tip of the nose will be in focus and not the eyes. Worse though, with the dog running towards me, by the time the image is caught, the whole face will be out of focus. And that's my experience, and I wasn't really taking any chances. This is for customers, remember. It also captured this sequence perfectly. I like them, but I do wish I'd used a wider aperture and blurred the background a little more. But the quality, sharpness and colour is really impressive. I swapped to auto area autofocus animal after a while, and it was really very successful. Once the dog was within about 20 foot, getting it to pick up the dog's eyes at a distance was a little tricky as the selection box is quite big. Now, there's two ways of getting the subject tracking to work. The first is to press the OK button to select what it has to track, the subject area, and then press it again to start the tracking. But I found this a little clunky. I allocated the job to the F1 button. To be honest, I didn't find that any easier. I guess I hold the camera slightly differently to everyone else. The second method is to press the OK button and then the focus button or the shutter button or the rear AF button. And the tracking continues all the time you press that button. Using the first method, the tracking stays on until the subject area is lost. The second way, it stays on all the time you've got your finger on the shutter or the rear button. I found that the best method by far. Let's go and see what I did with it. Ultimately, I used the Z6ii for the majority of closer shots and the D850 for any distance shots, mainly because that was set to single point autofocus. Now, of course, I could have opted to use that with the Z6ii, but if you've got two cameras, why make work for yourself? Also, remember, I wanted to test the tracking on the Z6ii. This one was 2.8 and the face recognition captured it almost as soon as the dog appeared and stayed with it. Now, it may not look like it, but this dog was approaching quite fast, and the face detection latched on. Then the little yellow box appeared and danced around the face a little, but it's perfectly in focus and the colours yet again are spot on. I was at f8 and an ISO of 1250. I've zoomed right in and the eyes are spot on. I thought I'd show you this couple to show how well the eye detection works. There are videos going around that show it moving around the face, and indeed it can do. But there's no design that it fought to keep this dog in focus, despite the fact that it's barreling through the grass towards me. Okay, we have a handful of ingredients. f7, ISO 640, and a shutter speed of 3200, plus one Manic Spaniel. Now, anyone that has tried to photograph this breed knows that when they run at full chatter, the head bobs up and down like a steam piston. Not the easiest subject for any camera. The Z6ii eye tracking bounced from eye to eye and occasionally hit the forehead, but you know what? It stayed in focus. Even though it opted for the far eye in the last image for some unknown reason. I was really impressed again. It's also a lot more forgiving in its shadows and its contrast than my D5. Throughout the session I used 70-200 2.8 and 300mm 2.8, both with the FTZ adapter. But although I mainly stuck with the 300mm, the Z6 worked well with them both. Even finding the right focus through all the long grass. Stunning. At this point the sun had disappeared and it looked like it was going to rain. Up the ISO back up to 1250 and again the noise is minimal. I found the Z6 could be a little rough with higher ISOs, but the Z6ii seems to be good. Now, as I was sat in the field, dust or pollen got onto the viewfinder sensor, which stopped me using the rear screen for checking the settings, etc. The first time I just blew on it and it cleared. Second time it wouldn't, and I couldn't get it to work. In fact, I didn't sort it until I got home and used my large blower. Let's go back to the pictures. The action was over and now it was just time for a couple of portraits. The eye tracking is just built for this and it makes the job so much easier. This is still the 300mm and I often use it for portraits. I mean, look what it does with the background. And whether I'm taking action shots or the portrait of an old boy like this, I need to trust the camera. And I think in the Z6ii I can. I enjoyed the camera and I really feel that the faults of the Z6 have been sorted to produce a useful piece of kit that's well worth its weight in my bag. The confidence I have in the camera meant that a few days later I used it a little for some dog agility with some very interesting results. The dog agility is a very fast action sport and I didn't think the Z6ii focus tracking would keep up. I normally use single point focus and pre-focus where I think the dog will be at the various bits of equipment and I plan to capture them. So in essence I wait for the dog to come into my focus area. All well and good. I did some of those shots, but then I wanted to test the focus tracking. So let's see how we got on with both. This turned out to be a lot more unpredictable. At times, the tracking seemed to pick up shots that I would normally find tricky, such as when the dog chases its toy at the end of a round. However, for things like jumping, my usual agility focus method nets me about 96% of usable shots with the D5, and would probably do the same for the Z6 too. Auto Area AF Animal is about 60% success rate. Obviously, this involves panning the camera with the dog. And there's a lot that can distract the camera en route. When it works, it's amazing. However, when it doesn't, I've got nothing to sell. I decided to give the camera a third try at another training day a few days later. And that's why we cut down on the first pictures. Now, it's doing hoopers. Basically, the dogs run through hoops. And this time I've got my Atomus Ninja with me so you can see what I'm seeing. The dog's movement should be fairly predictable with hoopers, so I was pretty confident, and I have to say yet again, I was right to be confident. I was impressed. Let's have a quick look. The Animal Auto Area AF caught the action about 95% of the time. Even when the dog appeared from behind a barrel, it attained focus really quickly. I was having to work hard with the selection tool though. As you can see, the camera seems to lose the dog quite often. I can understand the ones as the dog has turned round, but even when the thin hoop gets in the way, the tracking is lost. I've locked it back on again, and when the dog is released, the tracking stays on him. If a little left behind, that could be due to the fact I'm taking shots, but I'm not sure. I have a test for that in my next video when I compare the Z6, Z6ii, Z7ii with running dogs with and without taking photographs. Now I'm taking a portrait shot and the tracking is doing what it's designed to. But I'm still having to reset the focus point occasionally. But I'm happy with the colour and the detail, and the focus has definitely done its job, hasn't it? Let me know what you think. So, what conclusion have I reached? Well, the tracking system certainly seems to have its limits, but the system is years better than anything my D5 can dream of. And when I use pre-focus, the camera gives me better colour definition, sharper edges, and a more forgiving contrast between shadows and whites. What it doesn't have is the low light capability of the D5, but then it doesn't claim to. That's for the D9 to prove, isn't it? Anyway, finally, this was with my F-mount lenses and FTZ adapter. I wish I'd had the camera when I did the Z-mount 70-200 test. I really do. I'm going to do another video showing the subject tracking as I see it via the Atomus, and I will be comparing it this time to the Z6, yes it's back, the Z6ii, and the Z7ii. I'll also be testing it, the Z7ii that is, during a trip to a wildlife park soon for some portraits. Though to be quite honest, it's got to impress me hugely to justify the extra £1,000 it costs compared to the Z6ii. To be honest, I'm really looking forward to the challenge. I'm looking forward to seeing how it works, and I'm looking forward to showing you guys. Thank you so much for joining me once again. If you liked it, please do like it. If you really liked it, you know what I'm going to say. If you really liked it, try on that subscribe button because you know it'll suit you. It really tells me I'm heading in the right direction. And don't forget to keep leaving those messages and those notes underneath because it points me in the direction I need to go, to be honest with you. It helps me. Thank you so much for joining me once again. Take care and keep taking photos.